It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, more on the breaking news that the King has begun a process to remove his brother Andrew's royal titles. Buckingham Palace saying he will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. It comes after growing controversy over his links to the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Andrew will also leave his home at Royal Lodge in Windsor after he was served with a formal notice to surrender the lease. It follows weeks of growing pressure on the royal family to take action. It's understood the King will privately fund any future accommodation for his brother. Well, we'll bring you the latest on that breaking news over the course of the next hour here on the UK Tonight. Well, the breaking news tonight, the King beginning the formal process to strip his brother of his royal titles. Prince Andrew will now be known simply as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. The former prince has also agreed to move out of Royal Lodge in Windsor, as his links to convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein continue to cause controversy. It's understood that although Andrew denies any accusations against him, the palace considers that there have been serious lapses of judgment. Well, in an extraordinary statement this evening, Buckingham Palace said this: His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles and honours of Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. His lease on Royal Lodge has to date provided him with legal protection to continue in residence. Formal notice has now been served to surrender the lease, and he will move to alternative private accommodation. These censures are deemed necessary, notwithstanding the fact that he continues to deny the allegations against him. Their Majesties wish to make clear that their thoughts and utmost sympathies have been and will remain with the victims and survivors of any and all forms of abuse. Well, let's bring in Sky's royal commentator, Alistair Bruce. Alistair, quite the big move this evening from the King towards his brother. Your reaction to this, because this comes after mounting pressure on the royal family to be seen to be doing something about the controversy over Prince Andrew.
Well, the King is doing everything that he can. He is literally removing any element of royal separateness from his brother. The formal process to remove the Dukedom of York, the Earldom of Inverness and the Barony of Killyleagh is now being taken by the King's direct intervention to the Lord Chancellor to have his brother removed from the peerage roll. Then, in addition, by letters patent to remove his position as a prince and also the tradition that he was entitled to be known as Royal Highness, although he had not been using that for some time. This is as clear an act as the King can make to completely remove from his brother Andrew any element of continued association with the grandeur, as it were, of being a part of the royal family. And at the same time, I was very interested in the King and Queen's statement about aligning completely and utterly and irrevocably with those who have had to deal with any form of abuse. And also pointing out in the statement that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor has consistently denied any association with that, and he continues to do so. And I think that this is a reaction to a public determination that the initial step the King took was simply not enough.
And Alistair, the royal family had been criticised in some quarters for their slow response to this scandal that has been around for some time now. If you look at the timeline of events, the photo of Andrew with the then convicted Jeffrey Epstein walking in Central Park, that was back in 2010. He'd been found guilty of prostituting minors, and that photo of them emerged together in 2015. The allegations surrounding Andrew and Virginia Giuffre were first seen in Florida court documents, and then 2019, that now infamous Newsnight interview aired. So this scandal has been around for some time. The criticism around the royal family is that they were slow to act, but they're not slow now in terms of these titles being removed. It was thought it would be a lengthy process to go through Parliament, but the King is removing those barriers to get this moving quickly.
Whoever has found the route that has been recommended to the King, that it can be done by stripping the peerages from Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, through going to the Lord Chancellor, has saved the King the agony of having to ask both Houses of Parliament to take time to pass primary legislation, which traditionally is the way this is done. So full marks to Sir Clive Alderton, who is the King's private secretary, for finding that route and taking the advice to do that, because the last thing the King wants to do is to take up parliamentary time. The nation is facing many challenges, and the role of the King is to be a focus and to be part of what gives stability to the nation. And this issue of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor has been going on, as you say, for a long time. And I think it is excellent that it has now been possible for the King to do what he's been advised to do. And I am sure that it will be felt as a huge act, a very clear act by one brother on another, bringing to an end a situation that was part of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's life and now forever will not be.
For the moment, thank you. That's Alistair Bruce, our royal commentator. I'm sure we will speak again throughout the course of the evening. In reaction to this breaking news, Prince Andrew, formerly Prince Andrew, being stripped of his titles this evening by his brother, the King. Let's bring in Andrew Lowney, the author of The Rise and Fall of the House of York. Well, the fall really has been a hard one this evening. Your reaction to this breaking news?
Well, it's finally they've taken decisive action. I mean, this should have happened weeks ago. In fact, they should have been dealing with the Andrew problem years ago. But it's a welcome step. I don't think it may be enough to assuage public disquiet. We still don't know what's going to happen to Sarah Ferguson. And it also, I don't think, takes away from the fact that there may be criminal charges brought against Andrew. I mean, there's been a private prosecution launched. I think there are strong grounds for misconduct in public office. And so I don't think this is the end of the story. There are going to be many more disclosures coming out as the Epstein files open and as victims come forward. So I welcome it, but I don't think it's the end of the story.
The statement from Buckingham Palace talks about the fact that it's understood that Andrew denies all the allegations against him. He has done consistently and does, as far as we are aware, until this day. However, Buckingham Palace has considered that there have been serious lapses of judgment. What do you make of the wording they've used?
Well, I think the evidence against Andrew is pretty overwhelming. I mean, not just in my book, but elsewhere. But we've got to remember that Andrew has been protected by the palace and enabled for many years. The palace tried to shut down an investigation into him and Virginia Giuffre years before the story broke by ABC television. And they basically threatened them and said, if you run this investigation, we will never give you access to members of the royal family. So I think this is part of a wider problem. They've thrown him under the bus to save themselves. But I think there's still a lot of questions that are going to be asked. And I think it has opened up the question of the accountability and transparency of the royal family. And I think people will be beginning to ask questions, for example, about the leases paid by other members of the royal family. I think what's happened here is Beatrice and Eugenie have been saved in a deal but pushing their father out. But they both have flats at Kensington Palace, at St James's Palace, and I think people will be asking questions why non-working royals have these privileges.
Yeah, but of course, to be clear, that they have nothing to do with anything that's, that's involving their father. Can we just talk about what finally pushed the royal family to this point? The King and Queen, their Majesties, this joint statement very much signalling that the King and the Queen are on the same page about this. The Queen, of course, a champion for campaigning for women and against domestic abuse. We saw the King heckled outside Lichfield Cathedral this week in Staffordshire. And it's said that behind the scenes, Prince William, he gave an interview recently as part of a documentary series for Disney saying that, when he eventually becomes king, there will be big changes. So how much do you think Prince William and what has happened to the king in recent weeks, that heckling, played a part in what we see today? Talk to us about the weeks leading up to this decision.
Well, I think the main factor was public opinion. It was very clear from social media particularly that the statement 2 weeks ago wasn't satisfactory, that people really wanted to see a proper change in his life. They wanted him out of Royal Lodge. They wanted him to lose his titles. And the press were picking up on this, and it clearly was a distraction. And clearly the heckling didn't help. Virginia Giuffre's memoir really brought it home just how sleazy this had been. And so it's an attempt to draw a line. But as I say, I'm not sure this is still going to be enough.
What do you think the next step should be? Because it has long been said by survivors of abuse, those women involved in the Jeffrey Epstein case, trying to get justice for that group of survivors, that Prince Andrew should, face formal questioning, talk to authorities, police, whether it be here in the UK or in the United States. Is that a realistic prospect?
Absolutely. I think that is the next stage. I mean, he is a material witness, as is Sarah Ferguson, to what went on in Epstein's world. He has consistently refused to cooperate with the lawyers or indeed any law enforcement agencies, and I think he needs to do that. I think we need a proper statement from him about his involvement with Epstein. I think we also need a parliamentary investigation into his time as trade envoy. I mean, though everyone's been focused on his sexual misdemeanors, my own concern is the financial corruption that was he took part in as this trade envoy. So I don't think this story is over. There are many more questions still to be answered, but I think it is good the royal family have distanced themselves from him. I mean, he clearly was beginning to be toxic in terms of their own brand. And it'll just be interesting to see if the authorities do begin to question him and if he is prepared to talk to authorities himself.
Is there any feeling that he will get any support from the royal family? We understand that he will now move to private accommodation from Royal Lodge. It's understood that that is probably going to be funded by the king from his own money. Will he get any other support from the royal family other than perhaps paying for accommodation? And by that, I mean legal fees and things like that.
I don't know. I mean, I think we just need to wait to see what turns up. I think it would be unwise of the royal family to link themselves to him. I mean, he is, as I say, very toxic and damaging the reputation of the monarchy, and so they're best keeping as far away from him as they can.
Andrew Lowney, the author of The Rise and Fall of the House of York, really good of you to join us this evening to react to that breaking news that the King is to formally remove the titles and honours from Andrew, formerly Prince Andrew, over his links to Jeffrey Epstein. Let's remind you of that statement from Buckingham Palace that came out a little earlier this evening. It says, His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles and honours of Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. His lease on Royal Lodge has to date provided him with legal protection to continue in residence. Formal notice has now been served to surrender the lease, and he will move to alternative private accommodation. These censures are deemed necessary, notwithstanding the fact that he continues to deny the allegations against him. Their Majesties wish to make clear that their thoughts and utmost sympathies have been and will remain with the victims and survivors of any and all forms of abuse. Sky's Molly Malone joins me now for more on this. And Molly, just a reminder there of the statement. As I was just reflecting with my guests there, the royal family have come under a huge amount of criticism over recent months, indeed years, for being slow to act, in fact, act at all when it comes to Prince Andrew. But we've got a pretty decisive bit of action this evening.
Yeah, decisive and quick. I think it all came at speed this evening. And this has been, as we know, weeks and weeks now, months even, as you say, of controversy, of accusations and allegations surrounding Andrew's connections with the late convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. And two important things have happened quite quickly this evening. One, as you say, he's lost his title as prince, and that is happening with immediate effect. Essentially, he'll become an ordinary person in terms of his titles, though clearly a brother of the king. And also, he'll leave Royal Lodge as soon as we understand as practically possible. He'll go instead to Sandringham, the royal estate in Norfolk. We know that he gave up his Duke of York title earlier in the month, but clearly the issues, the accusations and the controversy surrounding Jeffrey Epstein and Andrew's connections to him weren't weren't going anywhere. And so this is the next move, which came quite suddenly, really, at 7 o'clock. The king using the powers he has, essentially, to make change. The Dukedom of York is a peerage. He's now using what's known as royal warrants via the Lord Chancellor to remove that peerage. And that's instead of using an Act of Parliament to pass what would otherwise have been primary legislation, because I think the Palace will be conscious of trying not to take up too much parliamentary time to deal, as they see it, with urgent national issues, and instead allowing Parliament to do that. Now, just to remind people about what's been alleged, this for so long now has been about Andrew's connections with Jeffrey Epstein, the late convicted paedophile. He's always denied any wrongdoing, but the allegations have continued to mount up. In fact, we saw a photo earlier this week of Harvey Weinstein, Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein all being hosted at Windsor Lodge for Princess Beatrice's 18th birthday. And that was 2 months after the US arrest warrant came for Jeffrey Epstein. And of course, the Palace have been keen to emphasise this evening the importance of considering the victims in all of this. Virginia Giuffre, the Palace, keen to, as I say, make sure that they're focusing and their decisions have come on behalf of the victims. We've, of course, had her memoirs published recently, and in there she detailed alleged sexual encounters with Prince Andrew. So clearly this all happening at speed tonight. The King using the powers that he has via the Lord Chancellor to remove the peerage, remove what titles were left as these continued allegations mounted up.
Thank you, Molly Malone, across this story for us this evening. Thank you for the moment. We've been getting political reaction to the announcement that came from Buckingham Palace earlier on this evening. We've had this from the Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Ed Davey. Liberal Democrats wanted to debate this issue in the Houses of Parliament. He has said the King is absolutely right to strip Prince Andrew of both his titles and his residence at the Royal Lodge. It's clear that Andrew's position had become totally untenable, having disgraced his office and embarrassed the country. This is an important step towards rebuilding trust in our institutions and drawing a line under this whole sorry saga. The SNP's Westminster leader, Stephen Flynn, has said this evening, the right decision and an important moment for the victims of Epstein. I hope all those who were elected to Parliament and chose to defend inaction rather than speak out now regret the choice that they made. He added, as an aside, Keir Starmer, is Peter Mandelson still a Lord? A reference there to Lord Peter Mandelson, the former UK trade envoy to the United States, being an associate of Jeffrey Epstein, which ultimately ended in him losing that role. Oh, well, let's get more with our chief political correspondent, John Craig. I'm sure this has sent ripples through Westminster this evening, John.
Well, I'm not quite sure who Stephen Flynn's referring to there, but suggesting that some MPs wanted a gag debate on this. Parliament has actually risen for the weekend. But yes, we're getting reaction from party leaders. Nothing from the Prime Minister yet, who obviously will have had talks with the King about this. We know that the Prime Minister had an audience with the King on Tuesday evening. That was all in the court circular, confirming when it took place. But we've heard from, yes, indeed, Sir Ed Davey was the first. Sir Ed Davey, a week or two ago in Prime Minister's Questions, urged the Prime Minister to back a parliamentary inquiry, not so much a full debate on the floor of the House, but an inquiry by the Public Accounts Committee into the whole finances of Royal Lodge and the Crown Estate and so on. And this week, the MP who chairs the Public Accounts Committee, which is Parliament's leading spending watchdog, Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, has written to the Crown Estate asking for all sorts of information about the finances of Royal Lodge and so on. So that obviously is a move towards setting up an inquiry in Parliament. The Public Accounts Committee, one of Parliament's most powerful committees, chaired by the Tory Geoffrey Clifton-Brown. Let me bring you some reaction from Kemi Badenoch. She's been on a radio programme this evening, was asked about this. She said that being Leader of the Opposition is short for being His His Majesty's Leader of the Opposition. She said she'd been following the story more as a family. It's a very sad state of affairs. She said the King has clearly felt this is the right decision for the royal family. Must have been a very difficult thing for him to have done. I mean, having to do that to your own brother. She says, this is Kemi Badenoch, the standards and expectations in society now are very high. People expect to see the very highest levels of integrity. I'm afraid the whole Jeffrey Epstein saga and everybody it has touched, from Prince Andrew to Peter Mandelson, has shown the public has no truck whatsoever with any kind of sexual abuse or offences, especially when of minors, and I think that's quite right. So Kemi Badenoch there, a bit of sympathy for the family, really, the royal family. She obviously will have the occasional audience with the King, no doubt, as Leader of the Opposition. Obviously not a regular weekly one like the Prime Minister. But the Prime Minister clearly will have been closely involved in these discussions, and it was a few weeks ago that when Sir Ed Davey asked that question, and the Prime Minister said he was happy for a parliamentary inquiry into the Royal Lodge and Crown Estate finances. It was the day after he'd had an audience with the King, and MPs believed that clearly they discussed that, and the King had given his blessing for that. But now we're being guided away from what I initially thought perhaps was the next step, in part perhaps an act of Parliament. It seems that the royal family want to go down a different route, but I think there will have to be some moves in Parliament just to rubber stamp it, even if it's not a full-blown piece of legislation being rushed through Parliament. Possibly we might hear a statement from the Prime Minister on Monday. I mean, going back to previous Prime Ministers, I well remember, first of all, John Major, when Charles and Diana divorced, making statements. It was on the Windsor fire, as I recall, and John Major was very active in trying to smooth things when they separated, Charles and Diana, helping William and Harry, and I think John Major's kept in touch with them and is regarded by them as a friend who has obviously helped them along the way. And then, of course, Tony Blair's role when Diana died in 1997. It was only a few months after Tony Blair had become Prime Minister. No doubt everyone's seen that famous film with Michael Sheen and Helen Mirren. But the Prime Minister on a Saturday in late August stood in Sedgefield, in what was then his constituency, and he came out with that line, the immortal line, if you like, the People's Princess. And that Prime Minister, Tony Blair, was very much active in guiding the royal family then. Now we shall see if Sir Keir Starmer is now going to have to, amidst all these other things that he's doing at the moment, for example, leading role in the coalition of the willing on Ukraine and the Middle East talks with President Trump fairly frequently, and everything else domestically. Is he now going to have to devote some time to helping the royal family with this crisis? It's almost certain that he will have to get involved in some way, because, as I've mentioned, Prime Ministers do when these big royal events happen.
John, thank you. John Craig with reaction from Westminster this evening to this breaking news. A little earlier, we heard from our royal correspondent, Laura Bundock, who gave us her reaction to the breaking news.
Prince William obviously is close to both of his cousins and will know that for Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, this will be an incredibly difficult time. Think of the family as you will, but they have always come across as this very close-knit family, like I said, with an unconventional living arrangement with both Andrew and Sarah Ferguson living in the same house. But that is how it's always been presented, that they are close to each other. And I think it has been hard for the family to have to put essentially the firm over family here. So for the King to have to take this action against his own brother will have been a difficult one. It won't have been an easy decision, and I'm sure those discussions were not easy ones for the two brothers to have had. Certainly, I think there was a feeling, Andrew, when he a couple of weeks ago said he wouldn't be using those two titles, that perhaps this might die down, but it became clear that it simply wouldn't go away, which is why I think the king has sought the advice. He has spoken to the people who know about these things to see what would be the quickest and easiest way of removing all these titles and stars from his brother. We understood, there was one route through Parliament. It would require an act of Parliament, but there is an alternative method, which it seems is now being enacted. It is a formal process, but what the king is doing is asking the Lord Chancellor to remove the Duke of York from the peerage roll, so it doesn't have to go through the Parliament in the same way as had been discussed, therefore not taking up valuable time in government. So by taking the Duke of York, the dukedom from the peerage roll, that title can't be used officially. Now, as I said, but there is a real distinction here, because before Andrew said he wouldn't use the title, this means he won't have the title to use. So it is an incredible fall from grace. I think we just need to look at the man who was once a global ambassador, a business ambassador for Britain, jetting all around the world at one point. He was a decorated war hero. He saw action in the Falklands War. And yet here we are, the brother of the king, no longer even a prince, just Mr. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, and it's from now basically that he will simply be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor.
Royal correspondent Laura Bundock there. Let's bring in now Emily Nash, royal editor at Hello magazine. Emily, it can't be overstated just how significant this is.
It's absolutely huge, Sarah-Jane, and it's what many people have been calling for in the last couple of weeks. And the King's now acted very decisively to listen to that public opinion, I suppose, and to take the necessary action. He said all along that he didn't want to trouble Parliament with this. But I think it's very important that he's come out so decisively, and he'll be hoping that this draws a line under the most recent slew of damaging headlines.
Yeah, I'm just looking again at that statement from Buckingham Palace, which I know that you all at this stage of the evening know inside out as well, Emily. The final line, Their Majesties wish to make clear that their thoughts and utmost sympathies have been and will remain with the victims and survivors of any and all forms of abuse. It was pointed out that when Andrew put out a statement regarding this matter just a number of weeks ago, victims and survivors were not even mentioned, and it has been said this evening that finally the royal family are taking this decisive action and acknowledging the public mood when it comes to violence against women and girls.
Absolutely. It's something the Queen has long campaigned on. She's a huge supporter of survivors of sexual violence, and it's something she feels very, very strongly about. I think the messaging tonight was absolutely right. The statement from a fortnight ago left lots of questions unanswered, and a lot of people were disappointed that Andrew was allowed to sort of give it in his own terms and suggest that, this was very much his decision. Doing it in support of his family and the country. I think this shows that the King is calling the shots, and it will go a long way, I think, to sort of restoring public confidence.
Yeah. Emily, what happens next? Because, while we've got detail about where he'll be living, the titles that have gone, for so many people watching this evening, it's not about Andrew, it's about the victims and survivors and justice of anyone and everything associated with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. What do you think will come next? I've been speaking to some guests this evening that say the obvious next step, though by no means confirmed, is Prince Andrew finally, having refused to before, cooperating with authorities, telling them anything and everything he knows.
I think that's, a scenario that a lot of people would like to see for the sake of getting justice for those, who suffered at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein. We obviously have to point out that Andrew's never been found guilty in a court of law, and he continues to deny the accusations made against him. But I think, as we just said, the acknowledgement, certainly by the King and Queen, that the people we should keep at the forefront of our mind are the survivors. is a very important one. The story's obviously not over for Andrew, but this is a significant moment in terms of his status as a member of the royal family and the optics that have caused the royal family so much trouble in recent weeks.
While this story will most certainly continue for Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, as he will be known from this evening onwards, has a line been drawn under this for the royal family in terms of distancing themselves from him and this scandal?
I think they needed to take the steps they've taken this evening to simply stop people calling for more to be done. You know, people were calling for him to lose his princely title. They were calling for him to move from Royal Lodge. It's something that the king has wanted him to do for a very long time now. And it seems that Andrew's finally accepted that he does need to sort of pay the price for these serious lapses of judgment, as the king describes them in the statement. So it goes a long way, I think, to distancing the royal family from what's happened. But of course, it's not the end of the story for Andrew.
Well, no, quite right. I mean, you know, this scandal keeps coming back in terms of, you know, we know Virginia Giuffre died by suicide earlier this year, back in April. Her memoir published posthumously. So, you know, this coming back into the public domain again. And there is the thought that with these so-called Epstein files in the US somewhere as yet unreleased, when information does, when, if, but how, comes out, once again, the spotlight will be back on Andrew Mountbatten Windsor.
I think, you know, nothing can be ruled out at this point. And, you know, the palace have done what they can now to get ahead of this story and to do what they can do to control this situation, because so much of it is, of course, way beyond their control.
Emily Nash, really good to have your time this evening. Thank you so much for joining us here on Sky News. Let's just remind you again of that statement from Buckingham Palace. It is quite remarkable. It came to us earlier this evening. It said His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles and honours of Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. His lease on Royal Lodge has to date provided him with legal protection to continue in residence. Formal notice has now been served to surrender the lease and he will move to alternative private accommodation. These censures are deemed necessary, notwithstanding the fact that he continues to deny the allegations against him. Their Majesties wish to make clear that their thoughts and utmost sympathies have been and will remain with the victims and survivors of any and all forms of abuse. Well, let's return to our royal commentator, Alistair Bruce. Alistair, we were reflecting earlier on about your reaction to this incredibly important and significant move from the King and Queen. In terms of any precedent for this, it's such a significant and big move. Has this kind of thing happened before? Because, you know, taking a look at the royal website, Prince Andrew still remains 8th in line for the throne.
Yes, and I'm sure that'll need to be addressed in due course, but your question is clear, and in essence, it is new in that this sort of very considerable action has not really taken place in royal families since the medieval period. But it is absolutely clear that the king wants to make a very clear and marked line between his brother, who obviously he'll have his affections for, and the royal role that the king has to deliver on behalf of the nation. And this completely expunges Andrew Mountbatten Windsor from any element of that, whilst at the same time in the statement recognising that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor denies any association with those allegations that have been made against him. But the king needs to be clear. And we're not in the Middle Ages anymore, where actually kings were sometimes much more brutal to their siblings. In this case, it is just the removal of all the outward symbols of what might otherwise make his brother Andrew seem special in the realm. And that's been done along with plans for Andrew to leave Royal Lodge. All these things will take a bit of time. But I'm fascinated that the King has been advised to send letters patent to the Lord Chancellor. This is a clever way of, as it were, putting the dukedom out of use through removing it from the peerage roll. But it's avoided what is the normal route for removing peerages, which is to go through the whole process of primary legislation through Lords and Commons. And I know the King would not have wanted to have done that, but this is significant and it is a first.
Sky News understands that the King's move also had the support of the wider family, including notably the Prince of Wales, of course, heir to the throne. The UK government was also consulted in the process. As you pointed out, Alistair, it's an unprecedented, unusual process that they're taking to try and speed this up. They have deemed the move both constitutionally proper and appropriate. This is according to Sky News information we've received and understand. And it really is falling in step with public opinion, because a YouGov poll released back in August found that Andrew was the most unpopular royal in the country, which is something unlikely to have changed in the wake of recent stories involving in this scandal that just seem to keep on coming.
Well, it's very clear that the public has not been satisfied with what the King attempted to do, which was to agree with Andrew Mountbatten Windsor to put his dukedom, his earldom, his barony and his honours beyond use. That was not deemed to be enough. We saw the way in which somebody in a crowd reacted to the King during a walkabout. But I think much more evident has been this steady drumbeat of anxiety by the nation that they wanted Andrew Mountbatten Windsor absolutely out of the royal story. Now, of course, he's a member of a family, and that family has its affections one for another. But the King is the sovereign, and there's this other role that he has to perform. And whereas Elizabeth II, as a mother, found it, I think, probably very difficult to make sure that the steps that were taken when she was alive, I think it may be 1 degree more easy for the King to respond to this public opinion, getting the advice he has, both legal and from his siblings, no doubt, to make this resolute step, this historic change to the style, that is, the fact that his brother was born a prince and was a royal highness, so that is gone by letters patent, that his dukedoms given by Elizabeth II, the Duke of York, the Earl of Inverness and Baron Killyleagh, they are now by letters patent to the Lord Chancellor being removed from the peerage roll. And as sovereign of the Order of the Garter and of the Royal Victorian Order, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor has been expunged through the statutes from both the Order of the Garter and the Royal Victorian Order. That is, in its own way, a list, but it is as clear that this King can be that he is responding to a reaction in the public.
Yeah, Alistair, we're just looking at scenes here from back in September, the Duchess of Kent's funeral, Andrew's final public appearance, the last time we saw him in public, and a lot of people making, pointing out the awkwardness of exchanges between him and the Prince and Princess of Wales at the time. But just looking at these pictures, it may well be the last appearance of Andrew in public life, if the statement from the King is anything to go by this evening. We understand he's moving to the Sandringham estate, and we may well not see him here amongst his family again in public.
Well, I think it's the term in public. I'm sure as a family they will continue to meet. But this was, in essence, a private family funeral, if you can achieve that within the royal family. And for that reason, I can see why it was felt appropriate to have Andrew Mountbatten Windsor along with his brother, the King, and other members of the royal family. But I think that the public reacted very strongly to that. And although it was, by essence, a private event where he went to a cousin-in-law's funeral, I think it was just too much for the public to take with everything that's going on, and the reaction was very strong. And the fact that it seems to the public who are looking at it that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was not necessarily being embraced by the family, but he was, of course, there. And I think that, you know, it is tough for a family to deal with challenges of this nature. They are unique as a family, but at the same time, the king must be resolute to protect his responsibility to the crown and to his coronation responsibilities, which he undertook. Of course, you know, on that occasion, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was dressed as a Knight of the Garter and part of that distinguished order of chivalry. It's an honour that he was given by his mother, Elizabeth II. But you are right. I think that is the last time we will see him publicly in amongst his family. There are plenty of other doors in many, many churches, and it's important that family can come together on these special occasions. But I think that there's a front door for the royal family, and I don't think Andrew Mountbatten Windsor will ever be amongst them again.
Alistair, thank you. Alistair Bruce, our royal commentator there. Well, let's speak now to the former Liberal Democrat MP, Norma Baker, author of What Do You Do? What the Royal Family Don't Want You to Know. Thank you very much for joining us on the UK Tonight this evening to react to this remarkable breaking news. Your reaction when you heard?
Well, I think it was overdue, to be honest with you, and I think the royal family would have done themselves a favour had they acted earlier, but they are acting now. I think it's an attempt to create a firebreak, really, because this was spreading into other matters. MPs were becoming involved. The press and the public showed no sign of letting the story go. There's probably more to come out from the US Congress. And I think what Charles has done tonight is to try to create a firebreak to isolate Andrew to make sure the rest of the royal family doesn't suffer the flames.
Yeah, as of this evening, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, essentially to all intents and purposes, like you and I, an ordinary person, away from the protection perhaps of the royal family. We understand he's moving to the Sandringham estate, paid for by the king, presumably, from his own personal funds. But other than that, he finds himself an ordinary man, perhaps without the protections he's had before when it comes to legal fees, being able to not cooperate with authorities. And I'm thinking about the next steps. A lot of people have said the natural next step, maybe Prince Andrew, who's denied all of the allegations consistently against him, talking to authorities and helping them in whatever way he feels he can.
Well, there is, in theory, no exemption from anyone in the royal family being subject to legal process, apart from the monarch. Having said that, Scotland Yard's been very remiss when any matter to do with a member of the royal family has come before them. They've been very keen to do nothing at all. Now, Andrew should have been interviewed under caution, probably, in 2015 when Virginia Giuffre made her initial allegations, because at that point the Scotland Yard principle was to believe the victim after the Me Too situation arose. They didn't do so, they shut the case. And I think it would have been better all round had they investigated the matter then. But of course, the US authorities still want to speak to him. I hope Scotland Yard will look again at what the situation is, not because he's lost his title, but because there's an outstanding matter relating to information coming out of the US. In terms of money, of course, it's important to establish whether or not he's going to claim the refund, which the lease on Royal Lodge, in theory, entitled him to claim, which is about £500,000, I think, from ending his lease early, especially as he's been required to leave it rather than to make the decision himself. As far as Sandringham's concerned, he'll probably go to somewhere like Wood Farm, which is where Prince Philip ended his days. That's reasonably secure and remote, but it's a question of whether he wants security or not, and if he does, then I imagine he'll have to pay for it himself.
Norman Baker, if you just bear with me for 1 second, we've just had a statement from the family of Virginia Giuffre regarding the breaking news this evening. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, Prince Andrew as he was formerly known, just a matter of hours ago, being stripped of his titles by the King. This is a statement from their family which says, today an ordinary American girl from an ordinary American family brought down a British prince with her truth and extraordinary courage. Virginia Roberts Giuffre, our sister, a child when she was sexually assaulted by Andrew, never stopped fighting for accountability for what had happened to her and to countless other survivors like her. Today, she declares victory. We, her family, along with her survivor sisters, continue Virginia's battle and will not rest until the same accountability applies to all of the abusers and abettors connected to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. That is from Sky and Amanda Roberts, Danny and Lynette Wilson, the family of Virginia Giuffre, who died by suicide earlier this year in April. Her memoir published just a matter of weeks ago. Norman, if I could just get your reaction to that statement from the family, because for many people watching this evening, there has been too much talk of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, as he's now known, and his titles and his place of residence, and it should be much more about victims. Again, I do say that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor denies all the allegations against him. The royal family tonight calling anything he's done serious lapses of judgment. But we should be talking about victims at this time rather than the intricacies of royal titles.
Yes, well, I think that's a very fair point to make, actually. And I would say that you can only feel very sorry for Virginia Giuffre because she had a horrible life. She was horribly exploited by Ghislaine Maxwell and by Jeffrey Epstein, flown around to be handed over to uncaring men to exploit her. And, she ended up taking her own life. It's a very, very sad story, and I think it was heartbreaking. The extracts I've seen from her book are really quite difficult to read. Such a horrible situation for her to be in. So I wouldn't say this is victory. I mean, no doubt if she was still with us, she would be pleased by tonight's developments. But the way to bring this to an end in terms of the victims and in terms of this aspect of Andrew's life, and there's plenty of other aspects to be looked into, including his finances, by the way, but this particular aspect is for him to be subject to proper investigation by the police, which may either then clear him or lead him to charges. But at the moment, that's still hanging in the air.
What do you think we're going to see in the coming weeks? Because as it's been said, the thought is the royal family are distancing themselves, and that's evidently clear, distancing themselves at least from the scandal, if not from him as a family member. But the hope is that this will draw a line under the scandal for the royal family. It will not for Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. I mean, we've reflected this hour on the so-called Epstein files, what there is out there, what more information is still to come out. This is by no means the end of the story for him. So what do you think will happen next? Do you think we will see him go to the police to cooperate in any way he can? I
think it's very unlikely he'll go to the police, but I think what's much more likely is the police blatantly will go to him and ask him for a statement, and indeed I think they should do. As for the rest of the royal family, I mentioned the question of a fire break. That's how I interpret what Charles has done today. But there's a bandwagon rolling, and there isn't a break on it at the moment. There's no guarantee the royal family will be exempt from this. There's not necessarily a line being drawn. I'm sure that's what they want, but I'm not sure what's going to happen. Apart from anything else, you have to ask yourself what individual members of the family, the late Queen and Charles in particular, knew when that photograph was first published. No doubt they had a conversation with Andrew at that point. And certainly a conversation would have taken place when £12 million suddenly appeared to pay off Virginia Giuffre. So I think there are questions which have to be answered there. Possible, of course, Andrew completely lied to those other members of the family, but who knows? So I think there are other questions to answer. There's a whole range of things here. There's a Pandora's box being opened, and people now, including MPs for the first time in a long, long time, are looking at matters to do with the royal family. And I don't think the genie can be put back in the bottle, to mix metaphors.
Norman Baker, former Liberal Democrat MP and author of What Do You Do, What the Royal Family Doesn't Want You to Know. I really appreciate your time this evening reacting to our breaking news that the King has initiated a process to remove his brother's titles. From this evening forward, he will be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Well, let's just bring you that statement once again from the family of Virginia Giuffre, the survivor of Jeffrey Epstein, who's been at the centre of this scandal involving Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. The family saying this: today, an ordinary American girl from an ordinary American family brought down a British prince with her truth and extraordinary courage. Virginia Roberts Giuffre, our sister, a child when she was sexually assaulted by Andrew, never stopped fighting for accountability for what had happened to her and to countless other survivors like her. Today, she declares victory. We, her family, along with her survivor sisters, continue Virginia's battle and will not rest until the same accountability applies to all of the abusers and abettors connected to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Well, let's speak now to the royal historian, Professor Kate Williams. Kate, really good to see you. And I was just saying to a guest a little earlier on, you can't overstate the significance of what has happened this evening. Put it in a historical context for us. Has this ever happened before?
Yes, Sarah-Jane. I mean, this is unprecedented. This is a huge moment in history, in royal history. Now, we do have two key examples of people having their prince titles removed. And first of all, that is the daughters of Henry VIII, Mary and then Elizabeth, the future Mary I, and Elizabeth I. They both lost their titles of princess when their father, Henry VIII, annulled his marriages with their mothers, Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. And that was on the basis of illegitimacy. And his point was they've never been princesses. So that's one, but this is obviously totally different. And the other one, which is, I think, in everyone's mind, in terms of the legal process, is the 1917 Deprivation of Titles Act, a parliamentary act to deprive the titles of prince of those who descend from the British royal family, but at that point in the German army, through the line of the Hanover line. So they lost their titles because they were fighting on the enemy side in World War I, and that was obviously a very popular public move. However, what we have here is a situation where Andrew is not illegitimate. He hasn't fought on the enemy side, but he's lost his title, and he's lost his title as a consequence of what the statement said is errors of judgment, and what many people in the public opinion think is quite shocking acts. You were just mentioning there the statement of Mrs. Giuffre's family there, Virginia Giuffre's family. I've been reading the memoir, Nobody's Girl. It is a devastating read. It's devastating. It's heartbroken what she's been through. And as she said, Andrew felt he was entitled to her. And those words, she's sadly no longer with us, those words have great power beyond the grave.
Yeah, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, of course, denies all of the allegations that have been made against him, and he has done from the start since those allegations came out. I think it was back in 2015 they first emerged via court documents that were seen in Florida. So it's important to point out Buckingham Palace, that statement tonight, Kate, say that they consider there have been serious lapses of judgment. That's as far as they go on that matter. In terms of what's been changing recently in the wake of this scandal involving Andrew, has been politicians taking a look at the royal family, whereas normally it's fairly hands-off, and also talk about police being questioned by the police, either voluntarily or the police going to Andrew. Of course, you know, it has been pointed out that nobody bar the monarch is, you know, out of police bounds, as it were. But again, the public perception has been it's been a slightly hands-off approach. Has that always been the case when it comes to the royal family, both politically and involving police and authorities?
I mean, I think what we have here is a situation that's very unlike any other member of the royal family being involved in anything that might be looked at by the police. You know, this is not like your average speeding ticket or a dangerous dogs offence that we have seen the royal family engage with. This is something totally different. These are serious acts of which Andrew is accused of. And as we know, Andrew has been asked by the FBI, by authorities in America, they want to speak to him. We certainly haven't seen him on any trips to America recently, have we? Because they would want to speak to him. So Andrew is in this situation which is so unlike any royal before. Yes, we've had royals accused of crimes, say like Anne Boleyn, but it's a setup. Now, this is not a setup. Andrew is accused of these crimes. He has, as you say, denied them. But in the end, even if there's never any police investigation, the simple fact is that monarchy it's about a message, it's about perception, how the monarchy are perceived. They are a business and a firm, and it is about how they're perceived. And if one of the members of the royal family, one of the senior members of the royal family, is behaving in such a way to bring such disrepute to the firm, then he has to be dealt with. I mean, most of us, in our contracts, in our employment contracts, we have clauses about bringing the firm into disrepute. This is very different because it's a family and a firm. But clearly the King felt that very swift action was necessary. Obviously, last week the idea was that the statement was that he would step back from the title of Duke of York. It's clear from the swell of public opinion, from the commentary, from the actual people reading Mrs. Giuffre's memoir, that simply wasn't enough, and more act had to be taken. Firstly, his title, also being moved from Royal Lodge.
Professor Kate Williams, royal historian, good to talk to you tonight. Thank you. Let's now bring in royal commentator Richard Palmer. Richard, we're talking about titles and a change of residence for the man now known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. But tonight, should we really be talking about the royal family listening to the public and, more importantly, arguably more important, listening to victims and survivors?
Yes, I mean, I think what's clear from the statement tonight from Buckingham Palace is the King's disapproval of his brother, and the Queen's disapproval of Andrew as well. And they have sought to draw a very firm line under what has been a scandal brewing for, well, more than a decade now. They've tried so many times, persuading him to step away from royal duties and then stopping his patronages, stepping down full-time from royal duties, no longer using HRH, etc., etc. But nothing seems to have worked. I'm not sure this will stop the questions. I mean, I think some of your previous commentators have been saying that it won't, and I suspect they're right, that Prince Andrew must fear, and Sarah Ferguson must fear, that there are more compromising emails to come out, or that the authorities in the US will produce further evidence that raises more questions. But it's hard to see now what else the King could do to distance himself from his brother and to show his disapproval, really. I mean, one thing I think that isn't quite clear yet is whether Andrew remains in the line of succession. My guess is he does. I mean, the palace, certainly before I came on air, wasn't answering that question. I think he probably does still remain eighth in line to the throne, but it's academic, really. I mean, he's never going to be called to duty now. In theory, he still remains a Councillor of State, I think, an advisor, and somebody who could stand in for the King in his absence. But again, that was made clear quite a while ago that in practice that's never going to happen now.
Richard, thank you so much for your contribution this evening. That's Richard Palmer there, royal commentator. I just want to end on some of that statement from the family of Virginia Giuffre, the survivor of Jeffrey Epstein, who is at the centre of this scandal involving Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. They say, our sister, a child when she was sexually assaulted by Andrew, never stopped fighting for accountability for what had happened to her and to countless other survivors like her. Today, she declares victory. We, her family, along with her survivor sisters, continue Virginia's battle and will not rest until the same accountability applies to all of the abusers and abettors connected to Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Andrew denies all of the allegations against him. More at the top of the hour.